Personnel security. So when we look through our policies, our processes, and our standards, these are all the foundations of our administrative controls. And they include things like change control, configuration management, monitoring and response, business continuity, disaster recovery, and most importantly, personnel security controls. And that's what we're going to focus on in this lecture is personnel security controls. There's a lot of them and a lot of things you need to think about because humans are the biggest weakness in our networks. So when we talk about this, we need to start thinking first about separation of duties. Separation of duties is when I require more than one person to perform a task by breaking it into smaller parts. And this is going to provide a system of checks and balances to prevent fraud and abuse. For example, in my company, not one person can sign a check. It requires two different people by going through, and one person will authorize the payment, the other person will sign the check. That way, you have two persons looking at it and making sure that it's properly being accounted and no one is stealing the money, right? Now, the next thing we want to talk about is dual control. We'll take this example just a step further on our checkbook. Instead of somebody authorizing it and the other person signing for it, you've seen some checks that require two signatures, right? Some large corporations with anything over maybe a $5,000 check would require two signatures, and that's to make sure that two people have looked at it and approved it and that there is dual control and two people to blame. This helps prevent fraud big time. So this is the process of having two individuals perform the same action. In this case, both of them are signing the check to make it happen. Another good example of this is you may have seen in all these war movies, right? You look at Hunt for Red October or Crimson Tide, and they go to launch the nuclear missile from the submarine. They take two keys, both people put it in, and they both have to turn the key at the same time. That's an example of doing this. Unlocking a safe at the same time or unlocking a server room at the same time, that requires two different combinations and two different keys. That ensures that two people are always there doing that action. Now, when we start talking about succession planning, this is another big concept that you need to think about in your organization. This focuses on ensuring that important duties will always have someone who can perform them. If you have an organization that has very high turnover, this is critical for you because you need to make sure that there's no issues of a task not being completed because of personnel turnover and somebody quitting and leaving, and now you have nobody who can do that job. An example of this would be having a primary and a backup administrator on a server or other such functions that are critical. You want to make sure there's always at least two people who know how to do that job. For example, if I'm in a company and I'm the CIO and I'm going to be leaving, they probably should have my replacement there on board and we can do a turnover of, hey, here's the information I did, here's how I did things, so that they understand what's going on. That's succession planning. The company may even know that, hey, if the CIO gets fired or he quits, we're gonna promote the Director of Information Technology up to his position. And you have this succession, this line of succession. Just like in the United States, if the president quits, gets fired, or dies, the vice president takes over. That's good succession planning. Now, the next one we want to talk about is cross-training your employees. And this helps in succession planning, right? Because it focuses on teaching employees skills to cover other tasks that other coworkers can perform. So this can be done through on-the-job training or other skill sets, and it's used to ensure that you have additional resources in a big project for the future, or if someone walks out the door and quits. For example, if you only have one system administrator and he quits, how are you going to revoke his access? Nobody else knows how to be a system administrator, right? That would be a problem. So you want to make sure you're cross-training your employees and they understand different facets of the job. The next one you want to talk about is background checks. And background checks are conducted before somebody is hired into the organization, hopefully. You may be looking at their criminal past or you may be looking at their financial past. And which kind of background checks you do is going to be dependent on your organization. For example, if I'm running a bank, we have access to large sums of money, right? And in that case, we want to run credit checks on our people to make sure that they're not highly in debt and more likely to steal money from us, right? That would be a good idea. If I'm going to be operating any kind of business, I probably want to know if the person I'm hiring was a felon or a convict before. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to hire them, but I need to know that information. And so conducting background checks is going to help me do that. The next one we want to talk about is mandatory vacation time. Now, this sounds kind of silly, but you actually want to force your employees to take vacation. And it's not just because it's good for their mental health, but by making people take vacation, it allows us to identify any issues that could be hidden by them being there continuously. So let's go back to our system administrator. Let's say that he's really doing bad things. He's letting bad guys in the network all the time, and he's stealing information, and he's forging the accounting records so he can steal money and siphon off to his account. If you make him go on vacation for 2 weeks, the next person who comes to take his place to cover his duties for that 2 weeks we'll probably see that and detect it. And so by doing mandatory vacation time, it forces other people into other job roles, going back to cross-training, right? And they may come across something and that will be brought to the front. This is an idea that a lot of security experts recommend, and most companies will do it anyway because it's just good for your employees' mental health. Now, the next thing is, what do you do when you find that bad system administrator? Well, you fire him, right? You terminate him. These are the policies and procedures that focus on what to do when you fire or terminate an employee. Now, there's a lot of things you probably want to do. You want to get laptops back from them. You want to get data back from them. You want to get cell phones that you've issued to them back. You want to disable their accounts and change security codes and lock them out of the building and make sure that if there's any shared codes like a safe, that gets changed too. All of these things should be in writing and a checklist so you don't forget it when you go and fire an employee, and you can make sure you follow them correctly, because that's key to having good security. Otherwise, you may have a disgruntled employee who comes back to cause harm for you.